Welcome back. You're watching News Centre. Union Minister Ashwini Vaishnav has urged digital media houses to take accountability to combat fake news and safeguard democracy. Speaking on the occasion of National Press Day, Vaishnav also proposed that social media companies must pay compensation to digital media houses for content created by them, arguing that conventional media is losing out financially.
The second challenge is about fair compensation by the platforms for content created by conventional media. As we see, consumption of news and consumption of content is rapidly shifting from the conventional modes to the digital media. The traditional media is losing out financially because of this change.
Joining me on the show now are N.S. Napinai, Senior Advocate at the Supreme Court and founder of Cyber Saathi, Aruna Sharma, former Secretary at Ministry of Electronics and IT, Shashank Mishra, Partner at Shardul Amarchand Mangadas Limited. Ms. Aruna Sharma, if I can come to you first. Ashwini Vaishnav there, speaking on Press Day, said that it is high time that social media companies or digital media companies look at paying news outlets for the content they promote and use on their platforms. How do you think can this be done? Can India have a law on the likes of Australia? What will be the best way forward for a country like India?
Well, it is very welcome that he has made that statement, but he has talked about the social media. If you look at the Australian bargaining court, it is meant for the big meta and like Google or tech companies, where they are using their content and then it goes. So if you technically look at the word social media used by the minister, then Google does not fit into social media even they're trying to enter, because they are more like a search engine. What is important is that the big tech and meta, yes, India badly needs to define bargaining court on the lines of what Australia and rest of the world has done. It's not just Australia now. Many countries have come forward for it. And there is a contract, there is an arrangement of commercial deal in which the government doesn't interfere. The commercial deal is between the content provider as well as the search engine metadata. The same formula applies here. But what the government does is they have an overview of a fair deal. And that is what is important, that there has to be a provision. So what is important and what has been in demand for a very long time, that MITI in its act, they were thinking to come up with the over-encompassing digital act, which has been withdrawn. So it is important to define, just add the definition of mandatory bargaining code. And I think that will serve the purpose of roping in these metadata companies as well as big tech companies who use the content of the traditional news provider or the traditional content providers which are being used. So that step is welcome, but this is something which is pending with MITI for nearly 1.5 years. So I think it is time that first they sort this out and then come to the local social media, which is using the content, which is an arrangement between the content provider and the user. Maybe they have their independent stringers or they have main source, and that has to be defined when they go about it. But if anybody's content is used, then yes, it is important to have between them an arrangement, a commercial deal for the same.
Right. Ms. Napina, if I can come to you, the minister seems to be looking at this from the lens of national security. On one hand, the aim is to check disinformation and fake news, and the other is to ensure that news outlets and journalistic outlets are duly compensated for their content. Can both these issues be addressed by the Digital India Act, which is in the works?
Maybe that's up to the ministry. But I would say that they don't really go hand in hand. One aspect deals with what are the responsibilities or liabilities of social media in terms of curbing misinformation or disinformation. And that, in a way, is already addressed by the intermediary guidelines of 2021 as it has been amended till date. The second aspect is with respect to fair compensation for legacy news channels. And that is an aspect which I would say stands on a different footing. The way I look at it is this. It's very critical for us to ensure that this pillar of democracy is safeguarded. It's, after all, the fourth estate. And for it to be safeguarded, you have to also ensure that there is a revenue stream that will help continue this media system. So when you look at what the minister appears to have adverted to, the first issue that comes to my mind is protect the ownership of the content that has been generated by media houses, which is probably being used in social media. And as any copyright law flows, if you're going to use someone's proprietary content, then you have to pay for it. The second aspect is that payment ensures a fair play in terms of the person who is generating content getting the benefit of that. And the third aspect is to kind of like have a system-driven process which will ensure that there is parity in terms of also what is happening across multiple jurisdictions. If it is happening in Australia, Canada, and proposed in the in USA, why not in India also?
Right. Let me also go across to Shashank Mishra at this point. Shashank, what do you think has been holding back the government of India of having a law on the lines of the News Bargaining Code of Australia or Canada, US or France for that matter?
Thanks, Parikshit. So it's a complex issue. I do not think we should rush into conclusions by a statement that we've recently read. And in fact, TRAI, which is the regulator for the broadcast sector as well, along with telecom, recently did a report where, to our surprise, in fact, it says that we don't have clear numbers in terms of how much the broadcast sector contributes to the GDP of the country. And in fact, we have to look at trade, transport, hotels, along with broadcast to come up with a number of 17% of the GDP being contributed by an area like this. The reason I cite this as an example is to show how less data and how less informed we are in terms of the actual problem. So while the minister, of course, rightly says that it's a key issue today, how to deal with that issue, what is fair, what is the meaning of compensation, are all things that we need to really dive deep into. Otherwise, we will end up, not encouraging innovation in the way that it should be. And the closest example that comes to mind is OTT regulation, for example. Traditional telecom players, of course, have their own rights to demand for regulation of OTT, etc. But we have been moving on that front, but not quite reaching a particular law or a finality on regulation because it's a complex issue. It's an issue that countries across the world are dealing with. We cannot jump to quick conclusions based on, let's say, the example of one country or the other. Because first of all, we have to define what the problem is. Who is responsible for the problem, if at all? Or is it market forces determining the playing out of a particular scenario? So till we understand what the issues are, and how to tackle it can only follow after that. So I would say it's fairly early stages in the development of this regulation, and we should all look towards more data-driven approaches to an issue like this.
Right. Ms. Aruna Sharma, what, according to you, will be the right balance between having such a law to balance the need of news outlets and with the need of companies like X, Facebook to spread themselves wider in India? Because we have also seen instances in certain countries where Meta has said that we will not sign any more fresh deals with news outlets.
Yes, the big metadata and big data companies, they did try to arm twist those countries, but ultimately they had to pay off because the government intervened into it. We have an example of Canada where they tried to do it, and then these data companies had to step in. So as far as India is concerned, it is very important because 65% of the content has now shifted into usage or search engines of these data than the traditional provided companies. So definitely the ad revenue is shifting to these meta companies or big data companies. So when the ad revenue is shifting there, it is very important to have a provisioning of bargaining code. And definitely in India, many of these publishing houses have had the arrangement. But because of the lack of definition of bargaining code, of government being a watchdog, or the small newspapers or small providers from where the content is used, it is not a fair deal. And fairness of this business is the business of the government, and they have to overlook this. And that is where the Australia came forward, the European Union came forward, then you have even countries like Indonesia who have come forward. So it is very important to come up with this bargaining code. And once this bargaining code is in place, the role of the government is not to do contractual arrangement between the companies. But in case they find a non-fair play, or in case a complaint is received, then there is a tool available with the government to have a look at it and ensure that fair deal is there. And definitely India, with a big consumer of search engines, as well as providing the content, we cannot take the excuse that these big meta companies can arm twist and say, we will not step into India. They will have to step into India. They will have to provide these content. And therefore, for fairness of it, it is very important to have it.
Right. Ms. Napinai, my final question would be also on the impact of AI on intellectual properties of the original content creators, the need to check false news and disinformation. The minister spoke about the need to revisit the safe harbor provision. Now, this has been under consideration for a very long time. How do we address this going forward?
Here again, I would say a balanced approach is essential. I knew that the earlier conversation is going to lead to this issue about IPR and generative AI, because you know that these are cases pending and we are going to have to see how they pan out. But if you look at it in general in terms of how each website has its terms and conditions and limits what is the usage that data that is provided on an online platform is to be utilized for, it's critical to know that merely because content is available online, it does not mean it's a free-for-all. It does not mean that the owner or the copyright owner of that content has done away with their rights. They are just giving you a limited license. So if you're going to use that data to train your AI, generative AI or otherwise, then you will have to abide by the license terms. And if a person can show that there has been a violation, then there is likely to be a consequence. So today we are actually at a threshold where a lot is happening and nothing is happening. In a way, suspended animation. We are waiting and watching. And I would strongly urge that India cannot be on the sidelines. We have to start leading because we are providing the numbers as Aruna just mentioned. So we need to also protect those numbers. So when you talked about use of AI as a protective measure too, you have heard me speak earlier also of the Supreme Court's judgment in the Prajwala case, which led from the front in terms of using AI to protect the rights of women and children online. And it was the same technology then which moved on to protect against misinformation and disinformation during the COVID moment. So we now have to see how we can use technology to help. And please develop by all means. Nobody is stifling innovation and no law should also stifle innovation. But that does not mean that innovation will take the rights of others to the anvil. You know, you cannot compromise on other people's rights and their entitlement to the outcome or the revenues therefrom. So that's where the balance lies, and I hope India is not going to keep still waiting and watching. We need to lead now.
All right. Hopefully we lead from the front. Thank you very much, Ms. Napinai, Ms. Aruna Sharma, and Shashank for joining us on the program. With that, we've come to the end of this edition of News Center. Goodbye, and thanks for watching.